Our next speaker is Lucy Gansauer. She and I have worked together for many years now. She comes from Spartanburg Regional Healthcare System, which is the system that I work with. We work at Gibbs Cancer Center, and Lucy has been our NCCCP director for the last 5 years or so. She has her BSN from the University of Evansville, Indiana, as well as her MSN, and she's an oncology certified nurse. She is currently responsible for the implementation of cancer care delivery research at our site and has been involved in cancer care delivery research for the past 5 years. She has experience in all of the NCCCP deliverables, and there's many of them if you have any experience with that. She's published on quality outcomes and care delivery in peer-reviewed journals, and is very valuable to our institution. So welcome, Lucy Gansauer.
Oh, just the mouse clicks. Well, I want to thank you for inviting me to speak today, and it's a pleasure to follow Kate and Rachel. And I'm going to share with you just our site experience of both what we've been doing for the past 5 to 7 years and what we did to prepare for the NCORE application and what we're planning to do in the future. Just our objectives, I want to share with you some lessons learned, how we built capacity, and give you some tips of how I think you might be able to identify resources within your own institution. We're not a large site. We only have about 1,800 new analytical cases at our site, about 538 beds. So this is really something that at a small community cancer center that is really achievable. And what I want to convey to you is I think it is really a valuable type of research that will add infrastructure that will every day impact your patients and your staff, because it helps you develop evidence-based strategies. It improves the capacity of your staff to deliver expert care. And I think in the future that's going to be more important. And as you get into pay-for-performance, we know that when you have guideline-based care and seamless care, evidence-based care, that also pays on performance as well. Our initial experience started with looking to expand our capabilities in disparities. The NCCCP grant was 40% weighted towards disparity, and when we looked at our program, we were doing a lot of good things out in the community, but we realized that they weren't at the level of evidence that we wanted them to be, so we went to look for capacity. And the first thing we did was look within our own state and started forming relationships with academic institutions, our NCI-designated cancer center, Hollings. And then, real fortunately, in our state, we have a CNP, a community network program run by Dr. Hebert, who's a really long-standing, capable researcher. And they were able to bring their expertise to bear upon our program and our staff and help us develop capacity. One of the first things we did was reach out to them and let them know of our interest. We tried to understand what goals they had and educate them on our capacity. They really didn't have any understanding of what an NCCCP was, what our goals were, or what type of capacity. We've got a fairly robust clinical trials program with a lot of investigators that are very interested, and we were very interested in the disparity. And when they understood that and that we were really motivated, they were willing to work with us. And so we even developed written MOUs around our goals, particularly around disparities and cancer care delivery research. The NCORE RFA really talked about developing capacity in these following areas. And so I'm going to give you some examples of some projects that we did in some of these areas. So this is some of our past experience that we put in our NCORE. One of the first studies that we did was a navigation study that we did in collaboration with another NCCCP site, St. Joe Chandler, and Hollings Cancer Center. And it was applying a lay navigator to a thoracic and esophageal cancer population to see if you could improve clinical trial participation among that group, and that you could identify the barriers and mitigate those barriers and really impact that care in a multidisciplinary way. While this study did a lot of things for us, it really helped us key in on some of the significant disparities that we had among this group. It gave us experience using a lay navigator, which we had never done, and this was an extremely positive experience. And then this is the beginning of a project that over the past 5 years we have really tweaked, was having navigators working with clinical trials, which has been highly successful at our program. So while this gave us capacity and cancer care delivery research, the benefits were far more reaching than that. Another project that we did with USC and Columbia, one of our academic partners, was this focused on prostate cancer and looking how to identify the perceptions to screening, how to decision-making, education, and so we studied dyads of older and younger African-American males. We had to recruit patients for this program. They had to go through a series of 4 educational sessions, and we had to keep those participants coming back. This really helped us gain experience on how do you reach this extensive population, how were we going to be able to get representation from the African American community in all 3 of our counties, how were we going to keep them coming back to our center, and then how were we going to learn? This was a community participatory research project, which we had not had a lot of experience with that. And so with the investigators at USC, they really taught our staff how to do these skills. We used a barbershop strategy for recruitment that we had never done before. That was an NCI best practice for recruitment among that population. We had always worked with faith-based, but we reached out to smaller faith-based organizations and developed relationships. And you can see we were able to recruit 129 African-American patients to this study. And these men are still involved with us, and we've done a couple of other studies since then. Another study that we did was looking at clinical trials, and we participated in this study because one of the things we're always trying to do with our CCOP is to understand barriers to clinical trials. And so this was an investigator at USC as well. He particularly reached out to us because Dr. Hebert had let him know that we were someone that was willing to work with, that we could accrue patients, and that we were a good participant. And this study looked at both focus groups on the perceptions around clinical trial participation, and then it also looked at the materials that we were sharing with our patients on clinical trials. Again, this made us examine our materials because we collected all the materials we'd been using for the past 5 years. That had not been an activity that we'd really sat down and completed ourselves. So we got feedback from this investigator on that, as well as setting in these focus groups and hearing ourselves from our own population, their perceptions around clinical trials. We have a mind-body program, so this is a study that we conducted. This is an investigator-initiated study at our site that we were able to do. We ran it through our own foundation and just looking at pre- and post-evaluation scores for that group, again, to provide evidence to the programs that we're delivering to our population. And I think as you get into cancer care delivery research, you're going to see thousands of opportunities in everyday work that you do. How can you provide the evidence to support that what you're doing has the outcomes that you want and is using the evidence that's out there to apply to that strategy? I think this was one of my favorite projects that I ever worked on because Dr. Ethan Bosch, which many of you in the audience probably knows, but he hosted a weekly conference call. We worked as a team, and it really turned into a learning collaborative. How do you work in a learning collaborative to improve your accruals, particularly to your target population? And our target population for this study was African Americans because that was a site that we had enrolled in. And our population is about 21% African American, and we were able to accrue 56% African Americans. And so our team sat on these calls. We were thrilled to be able to participate with this study in order to validate the pro-CTCAE's questions. But the learning that our staff received from that, I think, was worth more than doing the study. Some of the current projects that we've got going on now is, again, a navigation study. This is with MUSC. This is looking to see if applying a navigator can increase resection rates for early stage lung cancer. And so again, this is looking at enrolling of African Americans, because we know that African Americans less frequently have resection for early stage lung cancer. And this is elevating how our navigators are applying care, because all of these are built on foundations of evidence. They all look at standardized measures and tools, and I think it just enhances the rigors of your program. Here's a qualitative study that we're starting, and this is kind of a beginning study for a second study that we're planning. This is looking at qualitative research in African American females that are on endocrine therapy to look at factors that support whether they are adherent or not. And this was a collaborative project where we were part of the research team, so we helped with the protocol development. This is probably the first time that I've sat down with staff in Lisa's department and really designed a protocol. We developed the schema, the recruitment plan, phone scripting for reaching out to this population, and then what was our chart review process going to be. This is not something that 5 years ago I think we could have done, but you gain this capacity that really elevates your care that you can provide and your staff. INCORD defines participants, as Kate mentioned, as patients, practitioners, and healthcare organizations. I want to share with you a study where our organization is a participant. This is the Enable 4 study. Many of you probably know Dr. Bacadis, who's helped develop the ASCO guidelines for palliative care. This is her 4th study, and this is a dissemination and implementation study to see if this coaching model for early palliative care can be implemented within existing resources and structure of a community cancer center. And it was a community participatory project. One of the program models is it uses these 2 coaching guides, one for the patient and one for the caregiver. They're kind of extensive, about 50-page guides. One of the things that we had to do was customize it for our providers, our resources, and the staff that was going to provide the interventions. And we were allowed to customize what interventions that we felt were appropriate for our site. This is a 4-year project. We're about in the midway through year 2. But the first aim of this project was to use a community participatory-based model to establish this partnership and to see how the Enable project can be delivered in the community. If you're not familiar with CBPR research, I'll talk about it a little more later. It does require a lot more time and effort, and when you're not familiar with doing it, it can be a little bit challenging. But what I have found is that the researchers that you're working with are really willing to help you learn it. You learn a lot of tools, and at the end of it, you're kind of glad that you were able to participate and succeed. They also use a re-aim framework to evaluate how well we're going to be able to adopt this model and to really sustain it. They're going to look at pre and post implementation measures for our patients and quality of care outcomes for our patients as well. One of the things that it had us do to begin with is really look at what were the current measures that we had in our palliative care program. We were using some of these, like the Edmonds Symptom Assessment Scale, but you can see there's a lot of additional outcome measures here that we were able to look at and decide to increase some of the measures we were doing with our program. And we were able to really build these in pretty seamlessly. We've got social workers that work with the program as well as our palliative care physician. And luckily, our palliative care physician that's a team leader on this project really embraced this. He had heard about the Enable 3 results at a conference, so when this study was offered to us, he was excited to participate. I think the site benefits, as I've told you, to cancer care delivery is not just completing a accruals or research study, but it really strengthens the infrastructure of your entire cancer center. And I think that's one of the things that, like with this study, we're only halfway through this, and we've already got the engagement of our palliative care team in research. We've got them really working as a team, looking at rigorous measures for the program, looking at measuring outcomes, using an evidence-based coaching model to manage symptoms. And then this collaborative learning network with Dr. Piquetas, I think, has really been valuable. For some of you that maybe haven't participated in community-based participatory research, it's really a partnership approach to research. It really equitably involves community members, organizational representatives, with research is at all aspect of the process. You really start with a blank sheet of paper and a research concept, and you design the study together, you agree on the interventions, you agree on the measurements, and you really define how that study is going to be instituted in the community. These are some of the core values of its participation, influence, and control of non-academics in the process of generating knowledge. And it's sharing in decision-making, mutual ownership of processes, and it really has co-learning. And that's one of the things that I really have found the most valuable is the co-learning, and I think it's really elevated our entire staff, and transference of expertise was really valuable. I looked up this definition after we had participated in 2 of them, and all of that rang true for me. Just for comparison, you can see that traditional research sometimes can feel passive. You get a protocol, you have to adhere to it completely, where with participatory research, you really design that protocol to work within your own community. A couple issues to keep in mind is you really do have to be open and listen and participate. You have to be willing to share power. The trust takes time. Luckily, I think we started out in community participatory research with Dr. Hebert's group, Danielle Friedman. I don't know if any of you know her, but she was a delight to work with, and she made it fun, and she complimented you on every little thing you did and made you feel like you were the best in the world. So as we've worked with others, we learned those skills, and so I think that made us a little more successful. But there is a lot of uncertainty to begin with in the processes or the outcomes. With the Enable study, where I looked at all those measures and I thought, oh my God, how am I going to convince the palliative care group to do all of that? And, so I got a little panic attack. What if they won't do it? But, it's a shared decision-making. So we really had input into, with the resources we had, what could we reasonably do? Now, community participatory research is a slow process. When we first looked at the schema on the Enable study, the first year is just implementation. So the first year is making all this discussion, reviewing, deciding what you're going to do for your process and your measures. It really does see community members as experts in their patient population and care delivery. And it really develops relationships with your community leaders, and it sustains relationships really beyond the study. And one of the nice things I remember hearing is I was on one of the conference calls with one of our NCI advisors, and they told me Dr. Hebert had been in their office bragging about us. And, what a wow that was. And I think those are the type of things that you can get is you really extend your network. And it helps you to use evidence in working with community-based organizations as well, whether it's American Cancer Society, the US2 group for prostate cancer, or some of the African American sororities. It really gives you a framework for working with those organizations more effectively. Our current plan that we implemented in writing the NCORR grant, I'm going to share what we did, not saying that yet to be seen how well that's received. But here's what the RFA really asks you to do, is to provide a committed team, and they kind of gave you an outline of the participants that they wanted to see. And really, when I looked at what we had been doing, these are the people at our site that was working with our cancer care delivery. We decided to combine what I consider a really strong CCOP with another very strong CCOP. So we had, as Dr. Jim Atkins says, one of the biggest in the nation groups to go forward, and we felt good about that. And we were fortunate that Novant Health Foresight also had a lot of experience in cancer care delivery. And the good thing about their experience is it was in a different area than our experience. So we submitted a joint application together. And one of the first things we did was sketched out how our organizational structure would work for cancer care delivery. So as you can see, on the right is our team, and on the left is the team for Novant. But more importantly is we took that organizational structure, we put names to it, and for the past year we have been working together, learning each other's strengths and capacity, and defining research that we want to do together. Our principal investigators are Dr. Bearden, who's had all of our NCCP experience, and Dr. Judy Hopkins, who's done a lot of cancer care delivery with several of Wake Forest and several of the other research bases. And she's been doing a lot of economic studies at Novant Health. So I think we've got two really strong, experienced CCDR PIs. Our plan was to first sit down and really sketch out a plan that met the NCORR requirements and also met what we thought we could achieve within the structure that we had at both institutions. We decided we would have face-to-face meetings just on CCDR twice a year. We would have quarterly conference calls to keep up so that we could just keep things moving and making sure that we met the goals that we had set out, and that we would do CCDR education twice a year at our consortium's business meeting, because part of the NCORR wants you to mentor other sites. So we thought that would be a great way that we could mentor other sites by sharing what we were doing and really sharing the benefit to the cancer program, and then present a progress report at the business meeting. We defined aims for our program. The first aim was to further develop capacity, expertise, and experience in conducting CCDR. And we know that maybe the protocols coming out through the research basis may be slow, so we developed a plan that we could start working together so we had experience in collecting data from both sides and continue to increase our capacity. We wanted to aim to outline pilot projects over the duration of the award that we could work on together, and we wanted those projects to be something that we wanted to do anyway that would benefit our program. And we wanted to mentor additional consortium components to participate in pilot projects. We already have one component that's identified that they want to participate. In fact, someone that Kate knows very well, Dr. Siegel, who was from an NCCP site, joined one of our consortium sites. And so now we're going to have 3 CCDR sites. And I think we have a lot of expertise. He has a lot of strength around quality, RQRS, COPE. And our fourth aim was to develop pilot research studies that will yield viable research questions for CCDR protocols and proposals with research-based affiliation. We hope to start some pilot projects that we can then take to some of the committees that are forming at the research bases that we could then propose that they might be a larger study. One of the first concepts, since our site had really focused around more navigation and disparities, was we wanted to get some experience doing the economic studies. And when we met with Foresight, that's really not as complicated as you think, because you can merge your claims data with tumor registry, and we happen to have a program that's called MIDAS that really integrates all of our claims data and our financial data, and it can then be merged with our tumor registry data. So our first study that we're going to do this fall is study and examine the adherence to guidelines and utilization of CT, PET, and bone scans in early cancer care outside of guidelines. We want to see if there's any differences in adherence to guidelines based on race or ethnicity, because we know it is important to continue to look at disparity-focused research. And then what's the additional economic burden? This is something that administrators in your programs will see value in. Our second concept is looking at a navigation pilot study utilizing nurse navigators to increase enrollment of adjuvant chemotherapy protocols prior to surgery for breast tumors greater than 2 centimeters with palpable axillary nodes. This was a concept that Dr. Hopkins was really interested in doing. Our site was interested as well. So we've got 2 concepts that we're planning to start. We want to do another study to look at, can navigators impact clinical trial accruals? We want to compare, because Novant isn't using their navigators for clinical trial accruals, and we thought we could do a pilot project, because our site has got navigators heavily involved in not only educating patients about clinical trials, but to actually do screening, referral, and even eligibility screening, as well as removing barriers to participation in clinical trials. We want to look at a head and neck navigation study, and in fact, this study here is currently being proposed at the Alliance Disparity Committee and will be presented at this month's meeting. And it's looking at, can a navigator mitigate barriers to remove treatment delays and treatment interruptions in a head and neck population. That's a very challenging population for us, and this population has lots of treatment delays due to financial, transportation, dental, and then once we get them started, many times have significant treatment interruptions, and we know that that has a much poorer outcome. We want to do something with tobacco. Hollings Cancer Center has got 2 nationally renowned experts in tobacco, so we've got a very robust tobacco cessation program, high intensity, that we were able to start with our NCCP program, but we haven't really applied research to it yet. And we think our outcomes are excellent, but we need to really study that to prove it. This second concept is working off of our previous study, is we want to take what we learned from the previous study and try to use an automated voice response system for oral chemotherapy adherence. And we want to do this as a pilot project. One of the investigators at University of South Carolina is going to work with us on this project. My recommendations for you at your site is to really start looking at your capacity. And I think when you look at the RFA, they tell you some of the capacity that they think you need to have, you know, looking at utilization, service utilization data, billing, financial, your quality monitoring data, policies, clinical protocol, reimbursement arrangements. We've, as part of NCCP, had to submit a lot of this data anyway. We submitted copies of our policies. We submitted a lot of financial information related to our program. So we're kind of familiar with doing that. If you're not familiar with sharing that type of data, you need to meet with the stakeholders at your organization to make them aware that in the new CCDR research, these are things that you may be required to share, and just get them familiar with it. The first thing I would recommend is look at your tumor registry. I think clinical research has always used tumor registry to pull volumes. If you're going to open a study, you look at, you know, how many of that type do we have? Do we have the numbers to accrue well? Look at your claims databases and what type of systems do you have, what type of reports do you have, and what type of data can you marry. And many of your organizations have people in data management that are already working with a lot of data sets anyway, so you may not be aware of really the resources and capacity that you have. Look at your health, electronic health record, what kind of reports can be pulled out of that, how much of your data is discrete in fields that you can actually merge into a database so that you can manipulate it. And then do you have any integrated databases? We're fortunate to have MIDAS, which we can really integrate a lot of things, track patients over time. But Epic and Cerner, Premier, there's lots of other integrated databases that you may have at your facility. We're just now forming our data warehouse. In fact, it's in testing as we speak. They're applying clinical questions to this data warehouse. And I know many organizations are either thinking about a data warehouse, or they're in the process of bringing one up, or they're already a member of one. And so this is a huge opportunity to apply your research questions and be able to abstract information out of this for studies. Some of you may also be part of a health information exchange, which really will take outside data from your organization, pharmaceutical data, long-term care data, home health data that you can merge into for studies. But I think one of the under-recognized resources in your institution is probably your tumor registry. They collect a tremendous amount of data. They collect it very accurately. Besides demographics and race, ethnicity, zip codes, you can do geomapping, so you can look at pockets of disparities, and where do you have high stages of breast cancer, for example. We were shocked to look at our prostate data, and we had never really looked at zip code data as a community cancer center. We just didn't think of ourselves as doing epidemiological type of studies. But because we were part of NCCCP and they talked about rurality all the time, we thought, well, let's look at that. So we had somebody in our quality department really do a pivot table to pull out all of the PSAs over time, because we've got about a 20-year program of doing community PSA screenings. And we found this significant increased rate among our rural zip codes that we had never ever looked at that type of data. And so that tumor registry data can help you pull some of that out. You can look at providers, coverage, and there's also user-defined fields that we're making use of and putting in molecular markers. So we'll be able to run a report to see if on stage 4 lung cancer we're doing EGFR testing, and how often is that happening. Here's additional information. So all of those can lead to cancer care delivery research studies. Novant has really been experienced in combining their tumor registry with their electronic health record, with their financial data. And so we're hoping to really learn from them on that. And as I was talking about, they really have very accurate and timeliness. We're part of the RQRS system, so our data is very concurrent, real time. This is just an example of the abstract and all of the different data fields they have, as well as a user-defined. They have, your tumor registry staff has been participating with COC on a lot of really care delivery studies that the COC has generated over the past years. Preparation for CCDR. The first thing I would do is start your assessment, look at your staff and the expertise and strength. For example, Novant has got a genetic counselor that has already completed a couple research projects. We've got a genetic counselor who's collected a lot of data, but we haven't completed a research project yet. So we think that's going to be a way that we can strengthen our program there. Look at partnerships, and I would recommend to strengthen partnerships with academics in your NCI designated cancer centers. They need the access to your community and your populations. Look at your information systems, look at any integrated databases that you can make use of, data warehouses, tumor registry. If you have quality programs such as COPI, those can be very beneficial. I think one of the things that you have to do, because this Cancer care delivery is really going to be outside of your normal clinical trials department, and it's going to be something new. It's not going to be something that staff has necessarily had education and training and experience, and so you may get a little resistance. So I think the most important thing is probably senior leadership and your PI to set that as an expectation and to champion it over and over and over. And I know at our organization, Dr. Bearden and David Church and Dr. Yateman talk about it continuously. And it's brought up at meetings, it's brought up with the navigators, it's brought up among the administrative staff that we're going to be doing this. I think you need to prepare your clinical research department because they're not used to tracking. How do you track an accrual with your organization as a participant? So Lisa and I have got a team where we've been looking at all of our forms. We've been making sure that the forms that they use in their routine operations will encompass all of the nuances of cancer care delivery research. How are we going to track accruals? Who's going to enter those? Because a lot of that research will be coordinated and conducted outside of the clinical research department. I recommend a study coordinator for CCDR. You're going to need to prepare staff that's involved. Your navigators are going to have to take city training, genetic counselors, palliative care staff. So we've decided our organization to proactively incorporate those because Dr. Bearden has made it really our entire institution is a research institution. And if you take that mindset that everybody is part of the research team, you're going to expand your list for staff trained. One of the other things that we're going to have to do is look at our social and behavioral modules because typically we had focused on only the biomedical models. So now that we're doing qualitative and focus studies, we need to add those modules. So we've done that with our navigators. So now we're getting more of a policy and a standardization on that. And you need to meet with your IRB so that they're comfortable, your staff is trained properly, and get them to sign off on what you think your staff needs. And get a list. Lisa's got to process it. People are automatically tracked with their city training. Some of the lessons learned for us is not everyone is going to embrace research. It can be scary. Among our navigator staff, we had like 2 that just shot out of the box, and Kim Johnson, our prostate navigator, oh my God, she just loves it. She loves getting her accruals. She just embraces everything. Some of the others, they're just slower, and I think that's your typical change curve. So let those people kind of pave the way for everyone else. It does take additional time for your non-research staff, and it always takes more time than you anticipate, and it really requires them to work outside of their comfort zone. It's a new language. I have trouble sometimes even understanding some of the terminology that's used with the research methods in cancer care delivery because they're a little outside of what we normally do. And some external investigators don't have they've worked in academics forever. They really don't understand how things operate in a community cancer center. For example, in our Navigate study, they wanted the navigator to see the patient prior to the physician. Well, that can happen at academic cancer center because patients come to the cancer center for care. At our center, they don't come to the cancer center for care. They come to Dr. Corso or Dr. Bearden, and the patient would be shocked if the first person they saw was a navigator. And we had to explain, we have a private practice model, and we can't do that. And it was really difficult for them to understand that concept. They thought this is the way the study is going to be. And it wasn't until the other community sites told them the same thing that they really had to go back and amend their protocol. I think prepare your organization, prepare your staff. I would really strongly recommend a CCDR coordinator because all of these studies in kind of the examples I showed you, none of them are the same. And they all required working with a different group of people and getting that group up to the capacity. And I would really recommend reaching out to your academics and NCI designated cancer center and other NCI partners. If you have access to a community network program, they're wonderful to work with, particularly for disparities. This is a model from Jane Zapka, who's at MUSC, and there's a whole continuum. And along that continuum, there's 1,000 opportunities to improve how we deliver care. And she's defined in this lower part of this model all of the failure points. You know, we have failure points in screening, we have failure points in diagnostics, we have failure points in outcomes, and everything is local. You know, they say politics are local. Well, care delivery is local. You have to have evidence on how you're going to improve the care you provide locally in your own systems with your own barriers among your unique population. SWOG now has their committee. It's at 5 o'clock today. It's their original Outcomes and Comparative Effectiveness Committee has been retooled as a Cancer Care Delivery Committee. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them afterwards. I'll be here the whole conference, as Kate is. And I want to thank you for allowing me to share this. It's been a wonderful experience. Thank you.